the problem first of all. And it's clear that evil and pain have two possible sources. And technically speaking, we talk about the problem of moral evil and the problem of natural evil. The person who's told that she's got the cancer is suffering the cancer.
John Lennox explains suffering from a biblical perspective, so make sure to watch till the end. I'm going to be giving my commentary all the way through, and hopefully one day I get to interview him myself. I absolutely look up to John Lennox so much. He's taught me so much, and I know he could teach you guys as well. So let's get right into it.
You come up against the hardest question that not only I face, but that all of us face. And it's the problem of suffering and evil. And you cannot escape it. Now, it's always a difficult thing to talk about it, because who am I to say anything about suffering? You may have suffered terrible things that nobody else knows about. But nevertheless, all of us have to think about it, even when we're not suffering. Because if we're going to have a philosophy of life that brings meaning, it's got to be able to cope with the downside as well as the upside. You know, when things are going very well, you don't think of these questions. But once some big problem hits, then we're in trouble if we haven't thought it through. Now, I'm not coming to you tonight claiming to have the answer or the answers to this question. All I can do is, much more modestly than that, is to try to share with you some of the ideas that I have found helpful, increasingly so in life, to deal with these kind of questions.
That's good.
So I'm going to throw out a whole lot of ideas. You note down the ones that are important, and then we'll have a discussion about them at the end. There are no simplistic answers. That would insult people's intelligence, both their intellectual side and their emotional intelligence. Because everybody knows that shallow answers don't work. And aspirin will not cure cancer. So I'm going to be very careful as I lay out the problem first of all. And it's clear that evil and pain have two possible sources. There are the bad things that people do to one another. We call that moral evil. And then there are natural disasters, diseases, where, as far as we know, no human beings have been involved. Those are the two sides. Now, of course, they can be closely related, because if humans are greedy, morally evil, and deforest a part of the world so that nothing can grow, then the next generation of children may starve and there be a natural catastrophe. So they can be closely related. So that's two sources. And technically speaking, we talk about the problem of moral evil and the problem of natural evil, or the problem of pain. There are also two perspectives. It's one thing to be an oncologist. It's another thing to just be told you've 3 months to live because you've got pancreatic cancer. The perspective of the oncologist, he's looking at the cancer. The person who's told that she's got the cancer is suffering the cancer. They are very different perspectives.
My dad passed away from cancer, from leukemia, and it's a very difficult question. It's still hard for me to comprehend why in the world would my dad get leukemia at 55 years old and leave me and my other 12 siblings, 6 of them still very young, alone. It's not necessarily anything that he did. It's a difficult thing that a lot of us have to overcome.
They need to be treated in a very different way. Now, the audience is bound to be mixed in the intensity of its interest in either of those two perspectives. If you're suffering from something, the emotional question will be very large in your mind. But if you're only observing other people's reaction to suffering, then it will be the intellectual question that's most in your mind. And I'm going to try to briefly address both.
Oh, wow.
The intellectual problem is very old. The Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume wrote Epicurus's old questions are yet unanswered. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then is he impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then is he malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then this evil? And I suppose that's the way it's usually put. You cannot have a God who's all-powerful and all good and of evil at the same time. Those three things, having them in existence, is simply inconsistent. Now, of course, pain at the lower level is a very useful thing. I'm glad I can feel pain. There are some people that can't, and so if they put their hand into a fire or grasp something extremely hot, they will burn themselves and perhaps kill themselves.
Yikes.
So at those lower levels, pain is very important. And I believe there's a game in this country called football. I once went to watch the Kansas City Chiefs, and I was sitting with a man whose name was on the Hall of Fame even. He was very brilliant at it. So for an hour, he struggled to explain it to me, what was happening. And he said, have you got it now? I said, yes, I've got it exactly. He said, tell me, what is football? I said, it's a series of prayer meetings interrupted by war.
I never thought about it like that, but they fight and then they meet together in prayer. What if we did that on a daily basis? Go into battle, come back, pray, go into battle, go back, pray, spiritually, you know.
And as I watched those colossal men, one of them was knocked to the ground and obviously writhing in immense pain. Now, you know as well as I do that those guys will endure endless pain to become top footballers. And we recognize that in sport, that there's going to be pain. We also know that at certain levels, going through suffering can develop our character. Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, once said, I cannot imagine a great person who hasn't suffered. We can cope with that, but what we can't cope with is where the pain seems to be utterly overwhelming, where we simply short circuit at the level of it. And we say, okay, we can understand the first bit, but please don't tell me that having thousands of people wiped out by a tsunami is going to help them some way, or being shot to death by ISIS or something like this. And it's that overwhelmingness, both at the level of moral evil and at the level of natural pain, earthquakes, and so on, that really exercises our minds. And I'll never forget arriving in New Zealand 3 days after the earthquake. And I had to cancel all my lectures and change them into Earthquake Why, and meet people who'd lost their husbands or their partners or their wives or their friends or their family in the earthquake that happened just a few days before. These are very real questions, and so it's important to think about them.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I come from Northern Ireland, as Dr. Pitcock mentioned, and people say to me, look here, just let's stop for a minute. You come from a country that has been fighting over religion. So it's your religion that's causing the suffering, isn't it? And we look around the world and the number of religious wars, or wars where there's an element of religion, there are hundreds of them. They're associated with every religion you can name. And so people say, look, this is absurd. How could you possibly remain a Christian after the experience of your fellow countrymen? After all, my father's store was bombed when I was much younger, and my brother nearly lost his life with a terrorist bomb.
Wow.
And this in the name of religion. How could you possibly? Well, let me just say something about that, because I get asked it all the time. It's this, that, and I said this to my friend Christopher Hitchens, whom I debated. He just comes to mind, because Christopher, if you ever heard him talk, he was absolutely vitriolic against religion that led to violence. And in our first debate at the Edinburgh Festival, he spent 15 minutes absolutely excoriating religion. And I got up after this and I said to the audience and to Christopher, I said, you know, I agree with virtually every word you said. And he was a little bit surprised. But later in conversation, I said, Christopher, you know, what interests me about you is this. What I don't understand is that you say all that about religion, and yet you fight against Christ. Because if you understood what he said, you'd be on his side.
Right.
He said, what do you mean? Well, I said, actually, you know, Jesus Christ was arrested and put on trial for fomenting political violence. That was the accusation. He was exonerated from it by Pilate, the senior Roman official, because Pilate knew from the soldiers sent to arrest Jesus that he told his disciples, put your swords up, put them away. One of the disciples tried to cut off a man's head, but Peter wasn't very good with the sword, so he cut his ear off instead. He missed, and Christ said, put your sword up. And I love to think about that. I do believe that Jesus physically healed him, but apart from that, it's saying something. If you take weapons to defend any religion, you cut the ears off people in a big way. They won't listen to you. Now, what did Christ do? He said, put your sword away, and he put the man's ear back on. And I'm in the ear repair business myself, because I want people to listen to the message, because Jesus was tried for this, and he was acquitted. He told Pilate, Pilate said, are you a king? Are you a political threat to me? He said, not at all. My kingdom is not of this world.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my servants would have been fighting.
There's this saying, you should not get mad at Beethoven for someone else playing a song by Beethoven that completely butchers it. You cannot get mad at Beethoven, but you can get mad at the person playing the song. In the same way for religion, you cannot be mad at the Bible or Christianity or Jesus for people misrepresenting who Jesus is.
You see, I said to Christopher Hitchens, Jesus is on your side. He was as much against religious violence as you are. So that's very important. I often say it like this. Sadly, people have taken guns, not only swords, into their hands in the name of Christianity. Let me tell you straight, they're not Christians. Because a Christian is a follower of Jesus Christ. And followers of Jesus Christ don't get involved with violence. You know, the existence of counterfeit money doesn't prove that the real stuff doesn't exist, but it can make it hard to find. So that's the first point. But the second point is equally important. Many of the so-called new atheists, Richard Dawkins and so on, blame everything on religion. God is to blame for everything. 9/11 and so on and so forth. And of course, elements of religion are involved here. And we've got to examine whether it's true religion or false religion. Putting the Amish in the same basket as fundamentalist Islamist religion is not a very wise thing, because they stand for totally different things. And other religions must speak for themselves. I can only speak as a Christian here. So there's that side of it, but there's another side of it. John Lennon, you've heard of John Lennon, have you? He wrote a song called Imagine. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Imagine a world with no religion and so on. Well, I'm not John Lennon, I'm John Lennox. And I've written a song called Imagine.
So we used to have to sing that song in choir. And I was like, what in the world is this song? I didn't know anything about the Beatles, but they were singing the song. I'm like, this is depressing.
I'm not going to sing it, don't worry. Imagine a world with no Stalin, no Pol Pot, no Mao.
Oh.
What about that world? They never talk about it, the new atheists.
That's amazing.
Because what they forget is the amount of blood that has been shed in the 20th century is more than every other century put together, and it's mostly been shed by atheistic regimes.
Wow.
So if you're going to talk about religious violence, please talk about it, because there is no excuse whatsoever for any Christian taking weapons to defend Christ or his message. But don't forget, when you talk about that, to look at the other side, the vast quantities of blood. I've been in Russia many times and I've talked to these people. And one Russian intellectual I remember saying to me, he said, you know, he said, here's the mistake we made. We thought we could get rid of God and retain a value for human beings. And we found we could not.
Wow.
And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, when he came to this country, you probably remember the brilliant speech he made. And he said, if I am asked what caused 100 million of my fellow citizens to perish, and to sum it up in a short sentence, I would do it this way: we have forgotten God. That's a very strong statement. It needs to be put into the equation. Now, the reactions to suffering are very varied. You know, when the earthquake hit New Zealand, some of the reactions were fatalistic. That's God's will. God was behind it, he caused it, and so on. That fatalistic attitude that is characteristic of certain religions. But then there were other people that reacted and said, but these people suffer because of their karma. They must have done something in a previous life and now they're paying for it. And people who hold that view often say, well, there's no point in alleviating your suffering, because if I help you in your suffering, then that's going to make it worse for you in the next life, because you've got to work off that suffering. Then the other view is, coming also from the Far East, is that suffering is an illusion, as the Buddha taught, caused by desire. So if we get rid of desire, we get rid of suffering. It's partly true, of course. Some of our suffering is caused by desire. And then others react, and they say, well, I can trust God in this. And many others say, don't be absurd. Isn't this finally the proof that there is no God whatsoever? Richard Dawkins, in his famous analysis statement, said, you know, this universe is just like you'd expect it to be. If at bottom there is no good, no evil, no justice, DNA just is, and we dance to its music.
Essentially, he's saying we're all just robots. We're just people without free will, and we just do whatever our impulses and our chemical reactions do. That's it. And that's sad. And according to that thinking, there's no right or wrong. There's no good. There's no evil. That's what I was talking about with the Joe Rogan video I reacted to. If you realize that there's evil, then there must be the opposite of evil, which is good. Where does good come from? God.
So atheism is one of the increasingly common reactions here. Many of my friends, and I have many, many atheist friends around the world, they'll say to me, look, I look at the heavens, I look at the sheer wonders that science has shown to us, and maybe that is evidence that there's some kind of intelligence behind this universe. But don't you talk to me about a personal God. Isn't it obvious to you? Look at Auschwitz. Look at the Holodomor hunger in Ukraine, where I've been very often. Look at this, look at that. Don't talk to me about a personal God who cares. You're insulting me. Now, I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, I have the deepest sympathy for people that become atheists for those reasons. I've stood in Auschwitz many times, and I've wept every time. Just the sheer overwhelmingness of it is inconceivable. It blows a fuse in your mind. And I've wept with many people who've told me that they're the only surviving relative. These are very deep and real things. Now, try and follow me here. There's an intellectual side to this. If you imagine that atheism is a solution, let me suggest one or two things. I understand you if you're going in that direction. But yet I don't understand you in another direction. Certainly not if you take Richard Dawkins' view, because he tells me there's no good and no evil. But if that's so, why talk about the problem of evil?
Right.
If there's no good or no evil? If there is no God, I will want to know where you get the concept of good and evil from. Because if there's no objective, transcendent standard of values, our values are just subjective evaluations, just personal opinions,
Wow.
as many people today believe, under the influence of some kind of postmodern thinking. So where were you going to get evil from? So I will want to know that. Dostoevsky again once said, if God does not exist, everything is possible or permissible. Now, he didn't mean that atheists can't behave. That's an insult.
Right.
My atheist friends could put me to shame morally. And from where I sit, the reason for that is very clear. That whether they believe in God or not, they're moral beings made in the image of God. So of course they can behave morally. That's not Dostoevsky's point. Dostoevsky's point is much deeper. He's saying there's no ultimate intellectual justification for good and evil if there is no God. And that needs to be thought through very carefully, because it is a very important point. Charles Taylor.
Shout out to John Lennox for really helping us understand, like, yeah, there's a lot of difficult questions that is super hard to answer. But just because we can't answer them, we're just going to throw it out and say that there is no God and we're all just evolved to a higher order without a creator, and therefore nothing even matters. So you have no moral outrage justification in the first place then. There's nothing that you could be upset about if there is no God. Thinking about that logically and rationally. That's the thing with thinking about there is no creator. I believe 100% there is a creator, and through creation, all things were created by Jesus in the Trinity. So guys, I encourage you to go to Jesus today. Know that he loves you and he's longing to have a relationship with you. He came to this earth and died a sinner's death, a death that we all deserved. But he died for you. So put your faith and trust in Jesus. He will save you. He will set you free from all your guilt, all your shame, all the things that you've gone through in the past. And the Bible says, cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you. He will help you. So in the description below, you could click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today. And remember, Jesus loves you.